The bulldozer stopped at 7:14 in the morning, not because the operator was tired, not because of a mechanical problem, not because anyone told him to. He stopped because something caught the blade, something that shouldn't have been there, something that shouldn't have survived 80 years underground, in the dark, beneath 3 feet of compacted soil and the rotted boards of a well that hadn't held water since before any man on that crew was born. The site foreman walked over. He looked at what the blade had pushed to the surface. He picked it up. He looked at it for a long time. Then he called the developer. The developer didn't answer. He called again. Then he called the county historical office, which he had never called before in his career, and which he would never need to call again, because nothing he would find on any other site in his life would match what was about to come out of that ground. The farm had been abandoned for 31 years. The last person to legally own it, an old man named Warren Pruitt, who farmed sorghum and kept bees and refused to put in a telephone until 1979, had died in 1992 without a will, without children, and without telling anyone what he'd buried under the well. He'd buried quite a lot. What came out of that ground in the fall of 2023, in a small farming county in central Tennessee, would eventually involve a land title dispute reaching back to 1938, a deed that 3 different title companies had declared legally non-existent, and the surviving granddaughter of a black farming family who had been told for her entire life that her grandfather's land was simply gone, that there was nothing left, that some things once taken cannot come back. She was wrong, and the proof had been underground the whole time. The Pruitt farm sat on 218 acres at the southern edge of Maury County, Tennessee. It had been farmland since 1887, originally cleared by a family named Whitmore, who grew tobacco until the soil gave out, then sold to a succession of owners whose names appear and disappear in county deed records like faces in a crowd. Warren Pruitt acquired the property in 1961. He was 32 years old, a Korean War veteran, a quiet man by all accounts, who paid cash for the land, which was unusual enough in 1961 to be commented on in the county clerk's office, and then drove home and began farming it without fanfare or explanation. He farmed it for 31 years. He kept bees. He grew sorghum and some corn. He raised a few cattle in the back acreage. He was not friendly exactly, but he was not unfriendly. He attended the Baptist church in Columbia irregularly. He bought his supplies from the same hardware store for 3 decades. He was known to be fair in transactions and private and everything else. When he died in 1992, there was a brief notice in the Columbia Daily Herald. 17 people attended the funeral. The farm sat unclaimed for the better part of 3 years, while the county worked through the process of determining that Warren Pruitt had no heirs and no will. Then it entered the county's unclaimed property process. Then it sat some more. Then it was transferred in 1997 to a land-holding trust managed by the county, the kind of administrative vessel that farmland falls into when no one claims it, and no one quite knows what to do with it. And then it sat for another 26 years, waiting, while the fields went fallow, while the farmhouse roof caved in slowly, section by section over 2 wet winters in the early 2000s, while the old well, hand-dug, stone-lined, capped with rotting boards, sat at the center of what had once been the property's main yard, going slowly into the earth it had once served. In 2022, a development company called Meridian Residential Partners made an offer on the property: 41 condominiums, a small community pool, a parking structure, modern construction on old land, The county approved it in March 2023. Groundbreaking was scheduled for October. Nobody from Meridian Residential Partners had walked the full property before closing. This was not unusual. This would turn out to matter enormously. The demolition crew arrived on a Tuesday morning in October 2023. 7 men, 2 machines, a dumpster roll-off parked at the gate. The crew foreman was a man named Dale Simmons, 48 years old, 22 years in site prep, a man whose job was to look at abandoned structures and reduce them to cleared ground with the minimum amount of drama. He had worked hundreds of sites. He was not given to imagination. He was not given to history. He was given to efficiency, schedule, and the particular satisfaction that comes from leaving a site cleaner than you found it. The first morning, they took down the farmhouse. It didn't resist much. The roof had already done most of the work. The walls followed with the kind of resigned collapse that happens to structures that have been alone in the weather for too long. By noon, what had been Warren Pruitt's farmhouse for 3 decades was a pile of grayed timber and dust. The barn took the afternoon. The outbuildings came down the next morning. On the 3rd day, Thursday, they reached the well. It was in the approximate center of the old yard, roughly 40 feet from where the farmhouse had stood. The covering boards had long since blackened and partially collapsed inward. Vegetation had grown up around the stone lip. The ground in the immediate area was slightly softer than the surrounding soil, the kind of ground that has always had water nearby. Dale Simmons flagged it on his site map and scheduled it for that morning. Standard procedure for a hand-dug well on a demo site. Cap it, fill it, confirm the fill settles correctly, move on. He sent the bulldozer operator, a man named Kevin Marsh, to handle it. Kevin was 33 years old. He had been operating heavy equipment for 9 years. He was competent and methodical and did not talk much on the job. He positioned the machine, extended the blade, and began clearing the ground around the well's lip. The idea was to expose the full circumference of the stone lining before filling. Standard practice. He began his first pass. The blade caught something at 7:14 a.m. Kevin felt it before he saw it, a resistance in the soil that was different from stone or root. He raised the blade. He stopped the machine. He climbed down and crouched in the fresh turned dirt. Sticking out of the soil, partially unwrapped from what appeared to be the remnants of an oilcloth wrapping, black, deteriorating, originally watertight, was a metal box. Not a tin, not a can. A proper metal document box, the kind with a hinged lid and a latch, the kind that was sold specifically for the storage of important papers, the kind that, in 1938, a person who needed to preserve something for a very long time would have recognized immediately. The latch was still closed. The metal was corroded but intact. Kevin carried it to the shade of the fence line and set it down. He looked at it for a while. Then he called Dale. Dale Simmons did not open the box immediately. He sat with it for several minutes, which was not something he was known to do with anything on a job site. His crew noticed. Nobody said anything. He called the developer's main office line. No answer. He called the project manager's cell. No answer. He looked at the box again. Then he called the Maury County Historical Commission, a number he had to look up on his phone, which took a few minutes, and spoke to a woman named Patricia Hale, who was the commission's part-time director and full-time defender of Maury County's documentary heritage. Patricia arrived 45 minutes later in a white Honda Civic with a cracked windshield and a backseat full of archival binders. She was 63 years old, former middle school history teacher. 8 years running the commission on a budget that would not cover a decent lunch. She walked to the fence line. She saw the box. Her expression, Dale would later recall, did something that he found difficult to describe, like watching a person recognize something they hadn't realized they'd been looking for. She put on a pair of nitrile gloves. She opened the box. Inside, protected from 85 years of ground moisture by the oilcloth wrapping and the sealed metal lid, were 5 documents, 5 pieces of paper in varying states of preservation. She laid them out carefully on the hood of her car. The first document was a deed, not a copy of a deed. An original deed dated July 14, 1938, recording the conveyance of 218 acres of Maury County farmland to a man named Ezra Beaumont. The signature of the county clerk was present. The revenue stamps were present. The legal description matched the property they were standing on exactly. Patricia looked up from the deed. She looked at Dale. She looked at the property around them. She looked back at the deed. Ezra Beaumont, she said quietly. She said the name like she was confirming something, like she'd seen it before. The second document was a payment receipt, signed and notarized, showing full payment of $1,480 for the purchase of the 218 acres. Cash payment. July 1938. The third was a survey record confirming the property boundaries. The fourth was a letter, handwritten, dated August 1938, whose contents Patricia did not read aloud on the hood of that car. She read it to herself twice. Then she carefully folded it back along its original lines and placed it with the other documents. Her face had changed. The fifth document was something Dale didn't have a name for. A single page, handwritten in a different hand from the letter, with a list of names running down the left margin. He counted 14 names. Below the names, a date, November the 4th, 1938. And at the bottom, a single sentence that he read once, then read again, then looked away from. Patricia took photographs of every document with her phone. Then she placed them all carefully back in the metal box. She stood up. She looked at the site, the cleared ground, the demolished farmhouse foundation, the old well at the center of everything. "You need to stop work," she said. Dale blinked. "I have a schedule. I understand that," she said. "And you need to stop work. Today. Right now." She said it without anger, which is how he knew she meant it completely. This is the kind of story that gets buried for decades before someone finds it. If you found your way to this channel, subscribe. Hit the bell. We go looking for the stories that the ground has been keeping. Ezra Beaumont was born in 1901 in Maury County, Tennessee. He was the son of Clarence Beaumont, a sharecropper who had worked land in the county since the 1880s, and Mary Beaumont, who taught Sunday school and could identify any plant by its Latin name, a fact her son would credit his entire adult life for teaching him that the world has more layers than it shows you. Ezra Beaumont was black. In 1938, Maury County, Tennessee, he purchased 218 acres of farmland with cash he had accumulated over 18 years of working, farming other men's land, operating a small carpentry business on the side, saving in the particular way that a man saves when he understands that the margin for error is zero. The purchase was legal. The deed was recorded. The title was clean. He built a house on the property in the fall of 1938. He moved his wife, Dorothy, and their 2 daughters, Ruth, age 6, and Clara, age 3, onto the land in November. Dorothy planted a kitchen garden the first week. Ezra began planning his first season of crops. He farmed the property for approximately 7 months. Then, in the late spring of 1939, something happened. The exact nature of what happened is not clearly documented in any public record. What is documented, by August 1939, Ezra Beaumont was no longer on the property. By September 1939, a white farmer named Thomas Greer had filed a claim on the property, asserting that the Beaumont deed was fraudulent, that Ezra Beaumont had never held legitimate title. The county clerk's office, a different clerk than the one who had recorded the original deed, accepted Greer's claim. A new deed was recorded, in Thomas Greer's name. The original Beaumont deed was marked in the county records as voided, title dispute resolved. No court proceeding is documented. No hearing record exists. No appeal was filed. Ezra Beaumont's name disappeared from the county property records. The Beaumont family relocated to Nashville. Ezra Beaumont died in 1971. He never spoke publicly about the farm. His daughter, Ruth, who had been 6 years old when the family left, remembered the house. She remembered the kitchen garden. She remembered her father not speaking about it. And she remembered a specific phrase he used once, late in his life, when she had asked him directly what had happened. The paper said what it said. But what they did to the paper was something else. She never understood what he meant. Until now. Loretta Beaumont Hayes was 61 years old. She lived in Nashville, where she worked as a registered nurse and had worked as a registered nurse for 34 years, and where she had spent her life knowing two things about her family's history in Maury County. 1. Her grandfather Ezra had owned land there. 2. The land had been taken from him. The how and the why had never been fully explained to her, not by her grandmother Dorothy, who died in 1988 without much elaboration. Not by her mother Clara, who had been 3 years old when the family left the farm and remembered almost nothing. Not by any legal or historical documentation she had ever managed to find. She had searched intermittently for most of her adult life. She had hired a genealogy researcher in 2008. She had contacted the Maury County Historical Commission in 2011 and had spoken to the person who held the position before Patricia Hale, who had been sympathetic but said the records were incomplete. She had filed a public records request with the county clerk's office in 2015. The response had confirmed that no valid deed in the name of Ezra Beaumont existed in the county's property records. She had accepted this, as people accept things they cannot change. She had not stopped knowing that something was wrong. Patricia Hale found her on a Thursday evening in October 2023. 3 days after Dale Simmons's bulldozer turned over the metal box at the edge of an old well on property that, according to every official record, had never belonged to Ezra Beaumont. Patricia had found Loretta through the genealogy researcher Loretta had hired in 2008. The researcher had mentioned Loretta in a regional genealogy database entry related to the Beaumont family in Maury County. It took Patricia 6 hours to trace the connection. She called Loretta at 7:15 p.m. Loretta answered on the second ring. Patricia said, "My name is Patricia Hale. I'm the director of the Maury County Historical Commission. I think I found something that belongs to your family." There was a long pause. "What did you find?" Loretta asked. "A deed," Patricia said. "An original deed. For 218 acres, in your grandfather's name." The silence on the line lasted long enough that Patricia said, "Miss Beaumont Hayes." "I'm here," Loretta said. Her voice was very steady. "Where has it been?" "Underground," Patricia said. "Under a well, for 85 years. Loretta did not speak for almost a full minute. When she did, she said only, "He knew." The fourth document, the handwritten letter dated August 1938, in a hand Patricia had identified as Ezra Beaumont's own. was the one that changed everything about what anyone understood of this story. Patricia photographed it. She transcribed it. She read it to Loretta over the phone, carefully and completely the night after she found it. The letter was addressed to no one, or rather, it was addressed to someone Ezra Beaumont could not name. Some future person, some future reader, someone who he believed or hoped might someday find what he was going to put in the ground. He wrote that he was writing in August 1938, 3 months after he had purchased the property. He wrote that he had heard from 2 neighbors, men he trusted, that Thomas Greer had been making inquiries about the property. He wrote that he understood from these inquiries what was likely coming. He wrote, "I am not able to stop what is coming, but I am able to make a record of what is true. The deed is real. The payment was made in full. The land is mine by law and by work and by right. If any man tells you otherwise, he is lying, and this box is the proof of his lie." He described each of the 5 documents in the box. He described the metal box itself, the oilcloth wrapping, the sealed latch. He described where he had buried it, specifically carefully, the way a man describes directions to something he needs to be found. Under the well. The well I dug myself in the first week on this land. I put this box under the first stone of the well's south wall, 2 feet down. Whoever digs here will find it. And then at the bottom of the letter, a final paragraph. I do not know who will read this. I do not know when. But I know that paper lasts longer than lies if you put it in the right place. I am putting it in the right place. My name is Ezra Beaumont. This land is mine. That is the truth, and the truth does not require anyone's permission to remain true. Loretta Beaumont Hayes listened to Patricia read the letter. She did not cry during the reading. Afterwards, she was very quiet. Then she said, "He buried it before they took it." "Yes," Patricia said. "He knew they were going to take it, and he buried the proof before they could." "That's what it looks like." Another silence. "He never told anyone," Loretta said. "Not that we know of. He never told my mother. He never told my grandmother. He never, for 30 years, he never..." She stopped. "Why?" she asked. "Why wouldn't he tell them?" Patricia was quiet for a moment. "I think," she said carefully, "because in 1939 in Maury County, telling people you had buried proof wouldn't have helped you. It might have made things worse. He may have put the box there as testimony. Not for himself, for whoever came after." Loretta was quiet for a very long time. Then, "He wrote that letter for me. Or someone like you." "No," Loretta said quietly. "He wrote it for me. Here is where the story turns. Because Ezra Beaumont's box was not the only thing buried under that well. After Patricia Hale had photographed the 5 documents and identified each one, she had gone back to look at the well more carefully. The site foreman had agreed to stop work around the well specifically. Patricia had come back the following morning with an archaeologist from Vanderbilt, a woman named Dr. May Okafor, who worked in historical preservation and whose area of specialty was exactly this kind of site. Dr. Okafor's team carefully excavated the area around the well's base. They found, buried at the north side of the well, the opposite side from the Beaumont box, a second object. This one was not a document box. It was a glass mason jar sealed with wax, wrapped in canvas. Inside the jar, a single folded piece of paper. The paper was dated 1989, 47 years after Ezra Beaumont had buried his box. The handwriting was different, blocky, not elegant, the handwriting of someone who wrote infrequently. And the message was shorter than Beaumont's letter. Much shorter. If you find the box, find the family, the deed in the box is real. I know because I know what they did to make it go away. I helped. I was young and I was wrong, and I have tried for 50 years to fix it, and I don't know how to fix it. The family's name is Beaumont. They were here. I'm telling you they were here. W.P. W.P. Warren Pruitt. Patricia stood in the field and read that note and looked at the farm around her. Warren Pruitt, who had bought this property in 1961, 22 years after Thomas Greer had fraudulently claimed it, who had paid cash, which was unusual, who had been private in all things and had no heirs, who had lived on this land for 31 years, farming it quietly, and who had died in 1992 without a will and without telling anyone what he knew. Warren Pruitt had known about the Beaumont box. He had known about it since before he bought the property. The phrase in his note, "I helped." Patricia drove to the Columbia Daily Herald archive. She looked for everything published about the 1939 land dispute in Maury County. She found almost nothing. One brief notice in a 1939 issue recording a title dispute resolved in favor of T.R. Greer. 3 lines. No names of witnesses, no details. But she found something else. In the same 1939 issue, 2 pages earlier, a brief social notice. A young man named Warren Pruitt, age 17, was noted as a witness in a county property matter. 17 years old, 1939. Warren Pruitt had been there. He had been a witness. He had been part of whatever had happened when Thomas Greer filed his fraudulent claim. And then he had spent the next 50-plus years carrying that. And at the end of his life, 1989, 3 years before he died, he had gone to the well. He had found Ezra Beaumont's box, exactly where Beaumont said it was. He had read the deed. He had read the letter, and he had written his own note and buried it on the opposite side. And then he had died and left no will and no instructions and let the land go to the county, not because he didn't know what to do, but because Patricia believed he did. He put the land back the only way he knew how, by making sure no one could claim it for themselves ever again, by taking it out of private hands and putting it in the counties, and by adding his own testimony to what was already buried, hoping that someday the right machine would hit the right piece of ground. This story gets stranger the deeper it goes. If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Stories like this are exactly why this channel exists. When Meridian Residential Partners received the cease-work notice from the county, filed by Patricia Hale's office on the authority of the Historical Commission, their legal team responded within 72 hours. The position was straightforward. The company had purchased the property legally from the county land trust. The county's title to the property was clean under current records. The historical documents were interesting, but were not, under Tennessee law, grounds to halt a legally permitted development. Work, Meridian's attorney wrote, would resume on Monday. The attorney Loretta Beaumont Hayes hired was a man named James Whitfield, a property and civil rights attorney based in Nashville, 61 years old, who had spent 3 decades working cases that involved historical dispossession of black-owned property in Middle Tennessee. He had seen things like this before. He had not seen this exact thing before. James Whitfield filed an emergency injunction in circuit court on a Friday afternoon. The grounds, the 1939 Greer deed claim, had been recorded without due process. No court had adjudicated the dispute. No hearing had been held. The county clerk had accepted a private claim and voided a legitimate deed without legal authority to do so. The 1938 Beaumont deed, the original now in the custody of the Maury County Historical Commission, was the senior document. Under Tennessee property law, a senior recorded deed, if fraudulently voided without court order, retains its legal force. The Beaumont family's claim to the property had never been legally extinguished. It had only been buried. The circuit court judge granted the injunction. Work stopped. Meridian's attorneys filed a response. The response cited the 1997 county transfer, the moment when the land had formally entered the county trust. James Whitfield's answer to that: the county could not have transferred legitimate title to property it had acquired through a chain of title corrupted by fraud. A fraud in 1939 invalidates every subsequent transfer that rests on it. The case attracted attention, slowly at first, then faster. The Nashville paper ran a piece in November 2023. The Associated Press picked it up in December. By January 2024, there were national reporters in Columbia, Tennessee, asking questions about a metal box found under a well and an 85-year-old deed that should not have existed, but did. Meridian Residential Partners settled the litigation in March 2024. The terms included an acknowledgement that the 1938 Beaumont deed represented a legitimate prior claim, a transfer of financial compensation to the Beaumont Hayes estate, the specific amount undisclosed, a relinquishment of development rights on the property, and, at Loretta's specific insistence, negotiated directly into the settlement agreement, a requirement that the property be returned to agricultural use, not sold to another developer, not turned into a park, returned to farming. Loretta Beaumont Hayes told reporters after the settlement was announced that she didn't feel victorious. She said, "My grandfather lost 30 years of his farming life. My grandmother and mother lost a home. I grew up knowing something had been taken and not knowing how to get it back. A settlement doesn't fix any of that. What it does is put the truth in the official record where it can't be buried again." She paused. Then she said, "My grandfather put that deed in a metal box because he knew nobody would listen to him say it out loud. He made the box do the talking for him, and it worked. It just took 85 years." The fifth document, the one Dale Simmons had not had a name for, the single page with 14 names down the left margin, turned out to be the one that no one talked about publicly. Not during the litigation, not in the settlement, not in any of the newspaper coverage. Patricia Hale talked about it once in a conversation recorded for the County Historical Commission's Oral History Project in early 2024. She said, "The list of names is documented. We know what it is. We've shared it with the relevant parties." She paused. "I'm not going to describe it in detail here. There are families still in this county. Some of those names are still in this county." She was quiet for a moment. "What I will say is that what happened to the Beaumont property in 1939 was not an isolated event. It was not one bad actor. It was a process, a coordinated process, and Ezra Beaumont knew that, and he documented it, and he buried the documentation." Another pause. "He was a very careful man." The list of 14 names and the date, November the 4th, 1938, and the single sentence below the names that Dale Simmons had looked at and then looked away from, remain in the custody of the Maury County Historical Commission. A copy has been submitted to the Tennessee Secretary of State's office. The investigation that resulted from that submission is ongoing. There are, as of this telling, 11 other families in Maury County and the surrounding counties who have been identified as potentially holding historical property claims similar to the Beaumont claim. James Whitfield's firm has taken 4 of those cases. The Others are being reviewed. Dale Simmons, the site foreman, drove past the Pruitt property in the spring of 2024. The site was still cleared, the farmhouse still demolished, the barn still gone. But someone had been out there. The old well had been carefully restored. New stones had been laid at its lip. The rotted boards had been replaced. The well had been capped, not filled. It looked like something someone intended to come back to. Dale pulled over and looked at it for a minute through his windshield. He'd worked hundreds of sites. He'd never had a job stop because of a metal box before. He thought about the box on the hood of Patricia Hale's car. He thought about her face when she opened it. He thought about the words she'd said, that name, the way she'd said it like a recognition. He pulled back onto the road and drove on, but he thought about it for a long time after. In the summer of 2024, Loretta Beaumont Hayes drove to Maury County, Tennessee. It was the first time she had been to the county in her adult life. She was 62 years old. She drove alone. She parked on the road at the edge of the Pruitt property, her grandfather's property, and sat in her car for a while. The land was fallow, wild grass beginning to reclaim the cleared ground, the old tree line at the property's edge green and dense in the summer heat. The restored well was visible at the center of the yard. She got out of the car. She walked to the well. She stood at its lip and looked down into it, into the dark, into the depth that had kept her grandfather's documents alive for 85 years. She placed both hands on the new stone rim. The stone was warm from the summer sun. Later, she would say that she thought about her grandfather standing at this exact well. The well he had dug himself in the first week on his land in the summer of 1938. She thought about him digging the hole. She thought about him sealing the box with oilcloth. She thought about him lowering it into the south side of the well's base, 2 feet down, exactly where he said it would be. She thought about the composure that required, the belief it required, the faith that someone would eventually dig in the right place. He didn't know it would be me, she told a reporter afterward. He didn't even know I'd exist. He just knew that if he put the truth somewhere safe, the truth would eventually find whoever needed it. She looked away for a moment. That's what I think about when I can't sleep. That he put it there for a stranger, and the stranger turned out to be his granddaughter. And the truth waited 85 years without getting any less true. She didn't stay long on the property. She walked the perimeter once, along the old fence line, through the beginning of the late summer grass, past the old tree line, where the east acreage met the creek that appeared on the 1938 survey record. She stopped at the east end of the property. She looked back at the land from that vantage. 218 acres, the well at the center, the sky wide above it. She turned and walked back to her car. She did not look back. Warren Pruitt's note, the Mason jar letter, was officially entered into the Maury County Historical Record in February 2024. His name is now part of the documented history of the Beaumont property. What exactly he witnessed in 1939, what exactly his role was, has not been made fully public. But the note he left does not read like the note of a man who looked away from something terrible. It reads like the note of a man who didn't look away, who saw clearly, and spent 50 years understanding what he'd seen, and at the end of it tried to add his testimony to the testimony already in the ground. Whether that's enough, whether that's justice, or only the beginning of justice, is something people in Maury County are still arguing about. The Beaumont deed, the original dated July 14, 1938, signed and revenue stamped and absolutely, provably real, is now in the permanent collection of the Tennessee State Archives in Nashville. It is housed in an acid-free archival sleeve. It is accessible to the public. It can be viewed by appointment. Patricia Hale retired from the Maury County Historical Commission in March 2024. 6 months after Dale Simmons called her from a demolition site, and she drove over in her Honda Civic with the cracked windshield. At her retirement gathering held in the commission's small office, someone asked her what she considered the most important thing about the Beaumont case. She thought for a moment. Then she said that Ezra Beaumont understood something in 1938 that most people never fully understand. He understood that the truth doesn't fight back. It doesn't argue. It doesn't survive through force. It survives through placement. You put it somewhere it can wait. And you trust that the world will eventually get around to digging in the right place. She picked up her coffee mug. He placed it right, and the world got around to it. The property remains fallow. The question of what will be done with it, who will farm it, when, how, has not been answered. But it has been returned to the domain of people who should have always been deciding its future. The well is capped and waiting. The east acreage runs to the creek. The grass grows without permission. The land is still there, still telling the same truth it told in 1938. If this story moved you, and I think it did, please subscribe and share it. These are the stories that get buried, that wait in the ground while the world moves on above them. This channel goes looking. Hit subscribe and notifications so you don't miss the next one.